So without further ado, what you see on the picture is perhaps not weeds. You see green manicured lawn. And that is just the kind of picture you see around the world. If you go to Malawi or you go to any place, Tokyo, Japan, this is the sight that meets your eyes whenever something is seen as modern, Western, etc. Before coming here, and I'm still quite jet lagged, I was in Colorado, and my family used to live in Arizona. Arizona is a desert. But basically, when you go to Phoenix, what you see there is pretty much the same. Green manicured lawn, brilliant lush colors. And that is just the kind of thing that we see on a global scale everywhere now. So on a large scale, and this presentation is a little bit about the large scale of things, what do we see? We see a massive decline in certain species of plants. In fact, pretty much across board. And I must admit that I'm not at all a specialist. I think most of you know much more about plants than I do. I'm originally a social scientist. I used to do anthropology for the past 20 years or so. I worked at a business school, so I'm a very strange hybrid weed myself. But what we really recognize as social scientists too, and most of my work is very much about talking to people, community attitudes, etc. And we start to see this as a normal picture. So what we see around us, manicured lawns, parks, they are seen as completely normal spaces of recreation, completely normal spaces in which aesthetics come together with the idea of sustainability. And sometimes also when we are, for example, just yesterday, I came here from Amsterdam and going over some of the fields in Amsterdam. What's remarkable about it is that I think about 60% is agriculture. And part of the year they are lush green, and another part of the year they are completely brown. Everything is gone. So part of it is something from the distance does look very green, but in fact, these are obviously massive monocultures. And with massive monocultures, what happens is that a lot of other things that I'm particularly interested in the subject of biodiversity. Actually, I should mention that my specialty is so-called environmental education, and environmental education in the context of business schools, for example, but also in the context of teaching biodiversity to students at higher education level in general. So with biodiversity, and it's not just plants, it's also animals, etc. What we see is that around 4% of global biomass at the moment is wild. Just 4%. The rest of it is composed more or less of animals we eat. And right here, I have to say very quickly, so you don't feel bad and guilty if you're not a vegan or a vegetarian. Well, I'm not. So I know very well that probably I should walk my talk and be it, but there are all kind of reasons, excuses, whatever you want to call it, that I'm not. But the picture, I think, is very clear here. Most of the land mass is pasture land. Most of this is used as animal feed. So obviously, if you eat, if you have a vegetarian diet and you eat soya, then well, the obvious thing is that you need less of it than if you were to use this soya for feeding a cow. Now, in business schools, what we also like to do, and again, as a social scientist, sometimes I do ask my students, and also I ask myself, what kind of factors would help you to switch your diet? And I mean, one of the barriers that people name for not having vegetarian diet is simply put things like taste. At all this vegetarian substitute stuff in supermarkets. I suppose you have the same ones as we do in Newcastle, Sainsbury's, Tesco's. You see quite a large selection of things. Viviera, vegetarian butcher, Vegetarische Slager, I think it was originally a Dutch company. But yeah, they don't taste necessarily as well. But then if you keep asking people, well, have you tried this and that? And how about lab-grown meat, for example? And in some cases, yeah, these become kind of moments in which you think, okay, it's interesting to listen also to what the same business students say, because they're a very good audience. They're middle of the road students. They're not environmentalists at all. They're not interested in sustainability normally, but they are interested in things like market trends and consumption. And when they see things like vegetarian food growing very large on the market, especially, for example, animal feed for cats and dogs, pet food that used to exist for 90% of things like beef and chicken and whatnot. And this happens to be a kind of new growing trend, vegetarian food that actually sells pretty well, and people can become billionaires. Well, that's something that my students are keen to discuss, as a matter of fact. So there are certain factors right away we can think about that could right away serve perhaps as a solution to some of the issues here. Now, other issues that occur on the level of urban greenery, it was thank you to Maria this morning, who is very kindly, together with David, hosting me in their lovely house. Unfortunately, I'm leaving tonight. I would have liked to stay longer. But I have this lovely newspaper at home, and this is the article from today. And I'm sure you have all heard about the problematic, and I'm very bad at pronouncing the actual word right here, but carcinogenic substances that are found in so-called weed killers. And these are the kind of substances that indeed our children are also exposed to, and the kind of growing proof that we see that a lot of those weed killers, or, you know, if we think back to, I suppose it was 1960s, 1970s, The Silent Earth, or The Silent Spring, sorry, a book by Rachel Carson, already talking about things like pesticides, insecticides, all kind of chemicals that basically destroy things like plants and pollinators. I mean, they destroyed kind of, if we look at what biologists would call trophic cascades, we look at different chains, food chains. And if you take out something low in the food chain, insects, creepy crawly creatures, not iconic biodiversity, something like that, you also take out whatever eats them, so birds and then higher up, etc. And that in itself was already linked in the 1970s very much to the use of those pesticides, etc. And now increasingly we see more and more evidence that things like microplastics, or indeed those weed killers, well, they have a huge effect on our health as well, and especially younger people, just because of cell division, growth, and all kind of areas. So, yeah, and you know, I love this quote from a book called Cradle to Cradle. I only put one name of the author here, but actually there are two. It's William McDonough and Michael Braungart. The book Cradle to Cradle is very much about difference between so-called technological cycle and biological cycle. So when we throw things out, if you think of compost, and I think in the context of gardens, that's very easy to think about it. The biological cycle at the moment, not in the household of Maria and David, it's separated, but in many places, for example, in Newcastle, where I come from, there's no way that you can dispose of it, so just mixed in together. So they say a lot of actions that can be used in urban green environments can be actually super easy. But what we do now is simply put stupid. So they say the average lawn is an interesting beast. People plant it, then douse it with artificial fertilizers and dangerous pesticides to make it grow and keep it uniform so that they can hack and mow what they have encouraged to grow. And woe to the little small yellow flower that rears its head. And basically just the simple answer is, why do we do it? We didn't do it 50 years ago. We didn't have those things, as I say, in Malawi, in Japan, in wherever you go to. Just stop doing it, basically. That's it. And again, the larger message to it is there's something maybe about aesthetics, maybe something about traditional English gardens, when taking care of your garden meant weeding, meant pruning, meant showing that we humans, we possess nature, we shape nature, we change nature, and that's how come it becomes cultivated. In Newcastle, and I suppose it might be the same here, if you have unkept garden with weeds, that's not a good thing. City council and your neighbors might be quite concerned, you know. But it's a strange thing because, again, 50 years ago, nowhere in the world this idea did not exist. I mean, except for indeed those cultivated gardens and royal gardens, etc. But as far as lawns were concerned, and as far as personal spaces, but also parks, city parks were concerned, this is quite unprecedented, especially the scale of it, especially places like Phoenix, Arizona, and places that should really have none of it because they're deserts. So yeah, this is the word that I cannot pronounce, glyphosate or glyphosate, but basically from doing a tiny bit of research on your own city, and I'm getting more and more into it. And in fact, you know, because at the beginning you were talking about social media and X, and at the moment I'm also immigrating from X to Blue Sky. By the way, that could be maybe another interesting venue for social media and botanical gardens. I would promote Blue Sky at the moment. But anyway, there was quite a lot of discussion about, well, as a matter of fact, Edinburgh City Council and certain trial policy last year. Unfortunately, I couldn't find these tweets back. I don't know what they call tweets on Blue Sky, blue tweets, whatever. But anyway, there was an interesting thing about trials that were on apparently for a few years now and looking further into it. So yeah, the idea is to look at those alternatives that already exist, perhaps, as a matter of best case studies, let's put it this way. And obviously, it's not just Edinburgh City Council. There are a lot of places in the world that are considering the same things now, especially because World Health Organization, I believe they've placed a warning about this glyphosate. I believe in something like 2015 already. So it was a known thing a decade ago, but sometimes these things, fads, sometimes become more popular. And then there's a bit more of an effort to think through the alternatives as well. So yeah, looking also at kind of pesticide-free areas. I mean, it's probably too early to tell. And also, if you look at the global scale, I have been looking into some trials in America and in Canada as well. Even now, as I said, I'm still jet lagged coming back from Colorado, where my mother and sister live. But what you notice there is that areas that used to have those manicured green lawns, at the moment, because of massive forest fires that are raging through California, but also Colorado, just like in Australia, you have millions of forest fires due to climate change and other factors. The dryness, the droughts are becoming more prolonged, and people start putting more native plants in their garden. So in fact, I was quite surprised within 2 years that I've visited my sister. I've seen that their neighbors now actually have cacti, something called prickly pear that is actually a native of Arizona, but does very well in Colorado, the neighboring state as well. There are plants that simply put do not require much. Well, what happens in Arizona, you have sprinklers twice a day, basically. Most of this water comes from Colorado River, which is drying up as well. And then you have underground water used for this. But basically, none of it is used if you use those arid type of desert plants. And indeed, that change, to see it within 2 years, that's actually quite remarkable in some places, not everywhere, of course. So yeah, what We also do see, I've mentioned already this Cradle to Cradle book by Braungart and McDonough. Braungart was a chemist, German chemist, and McDonough is a city architect. So from their own expertise and knowledge, they've constructed a number of buildings all over the world, which would integrate greenery everywhere. Well, first of all, you can also think of it as extending farming. You can also do farming on the roof, so also on the sides of the houses. In fact, there are quite a few initiatives like that. Also New York and Manhattan, as a matter of fact. In this case, these are succulent plants. And I believe this was not taken from my work at Northumbria University, but somewhere close, and I forgot where. I was actually looking for a picture. We do have green roofs like this. They're pretty good. I'm not working for any company. Don't worry, I'm not promoting any particular, green roof company operations. But basically, yep, they can protect you against extreme heat in the summer, and they're very good at rain water absorption. The thing is, they're quite expensive to install, but when it's done by an organization at a large level, well, that works pretty nicely. You also have these things sometimes on vertical walls, and today I've learned that Michael, or one of the people I've met today, actually specializes, as well as David, one of the hosts, specializes in mosses. And mosses, as we know, they grow everywhere, also on those vertical surfaces. And sometimes you don't need to plant them. Obviously, they grow themselves, but not seeing them as an enemy, but seeing them as part of perhaps urban designs from the start. Also, in the area of urban design, there's a new thing called sustainable concrete. We have to be quite careful about it. Again, I work for a business school at the moment, and we are awash with greenwashing. So pretty much any good idea you hear about, normally there's something with it, and you've got to be very skeptical. That's what we keep telling students, but critical thinking is important because every solution sometimes has a dark side to it, and every solution might have some trade-offs that you might have to consider as well. But nonetheless, just thinking of it holistically in terms of we have a problem at the global scale. Greenery is simply put disappearing, especially any kind of native greenery. Also, we can see it as a substitution. Instead of saying, no, we're not doing it, we can be doing something if we need a roof above the head anyway, and then integrating these elements in it can be indeed a good idea. Well, there's a lot of text in this, and I would say that when it comes to answering easy questions and answering them with just don't do it, that is easy. I think one of the most difficult things of all, and I'll allow you a bit of time to read it for yourself, is maybe just that. There is a question of regenerative agriculture, and agriculture that allows for some biodiversity or combines variety of crops, does not use chemicals, does not use the types of insecticides and pesticides that are prevalent in the rest of the world. Is that enough to feed 8 billion plus people? We welcomed the 8 billionth citizen last year, I believe, to this earth. By some approximations, there are actually more people than we think because not all births are registered, not in all countries sometimes. And is that regenerative agriculture and alternative ways really enough on a large scale to feed the population of 8 billion and soon to be 8.5 billion? And again, in biological terms, if we think about ourselves, and I have to come back to this whole question of not being a vegan, we are a relatively large apex predators. Or actually, we are omnivores. just like bears and pigs and dogs, it turns out. But, you know, if we were ants, and in fact, you could have a few billion ants right here, and actually they would be extremely useful out there doing their service for ecosystem, not a problem. But if you have 8 billion of tigers walking around, yeah, well, that is an issue. And there's no easy answer to it. Also, it looks like from my critical reading of some of the literature about whatever you want to call it, regenerative, organic, etc., agriculture, somebody like Vandana Shiva, she likes to promote this. And there are lots of pros about it too, or things like crops used for certain industries. For example, for fashion industry, organic cotton. But there are right away also darker sides to it because anything organic uses more water. Also, harvests are likely to fail because they're not genetically modified normally, so they're not resistant to floods, they're not resistant to droughts. And yes, using natural predators, so different kinds of insects to eat existing insects because you still have to get rid of the insect, it's not nearly as effective as the good old DDT. And basically, you need a larger territory and you need, sometimes you have failed harvests. So to scale it up to the global scale, it is likely to cover areas that are presently protected nature areas as well. So there is some critical literature on that, but again, we have to be skeptical about critical literature in itself too, because who subsidizes it, who pays for it? Sometimes Monsanto does, you have ghostwriting, etc. So without propagating anything here, I do think it's quite important to think about serious debates in terms of what are existing large-scale solutions, but also what can be the potential problems with this, and where do we get this information from? Is it reliable? Who is writing it? Who is sponsoring it, etc.? Yeah, and I do think too that some of the questions you see here, and in a sense, we don't want to pitch humans against nature and say, well, we are part of nature in a way, so like why have this artificial division like us and them, you know? But again, if you look at basic statistics and just the variety of life on Earth, especially looking at plant variety, well, there are seed banks. You have some seeds here as well. I've seen it today. It's admirable. Eden Project also has amazing things down in Cornwall. But the thing is, on a large scale, again, diversity, it's only about crops. That's where most investment is in. And it's about food security. And very little of it has to do with things that, at another level, the ethical level, we can just ask ourselves about this key notion of anthropocentrism, which means human-centeredness in a sense that we see plants as something functional, something instrumental for our ends, and in particular, our food security. So yeah, these are kind of tough questions to ask of undergraduate students, especially if they study business, especially if they come from working family backgrounds, as they do at my university, and they're definitely not brought up with these kind of questions. For some of the audiences that I try to reach, they're not the audiences of the converted, so to speak. They're not the people who like plants or like this kind of discussions, because some business students, very simply put, they want to graduate, get their diploma, get a job, and make money. People like Elon Musk, and let's forget about X, but just people like Elon Musk could be their ideals. And this is quite confrontational, especially the irony of it, if you come from academic liberal left background, your own values might not correspond with the ones of your audience. That might be actually quite confrontational and quite honest in a way because they're not politically correct either. But anyway, one of the things that we do try to do with students, we try to arrange certain occasions upon which we do it a bit playfully, discuss these questions. We have debates, we have role play, we try to activate their critical thinking through indeed putting them on the spot and sort of trying to figure out without telling them, without lecturing, what kind of creative ways perhaps we can come up with without losing too much. And again, as business students, and in a business school, we especially look at the subject of alternative economies. Alternative economies, some of them also represent quite a bit of greenwashing. For example, the idea of circular economy can be also seen as quite a lot of jargon, but the actual decoupling of natural resource consumption from the economy just doesn't happen because of the laws of thermodynamics when it comes to things like food. Because if you eat food, what comes out of it is certain waste in the bathroom that cannot be reused or recycled. It's not the same in value. You can use food waste like bread to make beer, for example, but then again, at the end of the road, it's not a full circle. Then there are ideas like steady state economy, inputs, outputs that are balanced, looking at population, kind of win-win scenarios. For example, family planning in areas where people themselves very much do appreciate it. And as a voluntary offering, basically free contraception, things like that in areas where it is asked for, let's put it this way. Certain indirect effects having to do with the type of economies that can actually make a difference. Degrowth is another interesting project. And again, this is a shocker for a business school normally, because I mean, obviously all businesses want to grow, and so do our students want to earn money. Well, degrowth has many different ideas packed into them. On the surface of it, it might sound like we should consume and produce less, which indeed would be very good for looking at natural resources and minimizing the amount of land or whatever we use. But again, there are various ideas that I associate with this, and some of them are neo-Marxist, and personally, I don't necessarily find them very useful. Sometimes it's linked to interesting things like UBI, Universal Basic Income. There are trials being run in Jaro and other areas in place where I come from, so Newcastle area, just 2 hours from here by train. Again, you know, these are all concepts I don't have time today to really delve into and discuss, but it's worth thinking about when we think about large-scale production consumption, especially land conversion for agriculture. What type of economic systems can also look at natural resources and consumption in such a way that it can be transformative without sending us back to the caves, you know, kind of prehistoric level of consumption, which is probably not desirable at all. And I've just admitted that flown around the world just now, so my own carbon footprint and that of my 3 children is enormous. So again, it's not just eating meat, it's other things as well. Yeah, I'm afraid the resolution is not really great with this one. With circular economy, there's this so-called R hierarchy. So those R's, we used to have just 3: reuse, reduce, and recycle. And most students are familiar with that, and they think sustainability is about recycling. Well, in this one, it was in one of the articles we wrote, we put regeneration and rewilding on top of it. But again, rewilding, we had a discussion like this in the kitchen today, so I'm not going to go into that. But there are different implications of the term rewilding. But if companies, commercial companies and food production companies were to look at extended our hierarchy, and what you see under that, and maybe you don't see, it's blurry, I'm sorry for that, it says refuse. Refuse means don't produce, and don't buy. Again, it's very simple. From the time I started this talk, about half an hour ago, probably 1 million and probably maybe 10 million of t-shirts were produced in some factory in maybe China, maybe Bangladesh, maybe somewhere, just in half an hour. Most of them are made of cotton. Most of it is fast fashion. Most of it occupies humongous land masses to be made. But the truth is, even if we stopped producing right now, I think we will do pretty well for quite a while with the things we have. And it's not just charity shops that sell second-hand clothes, but I mean, already if we look in our own wardrobes and if we don't throw away any clothes we have, and especially looking at it through the lifetime, to think, wow, why can't it just slow down a bit? Why can't it stop? If any of you watch a new series, which just finished the last episode called Pluribus, I'm not exactly advocating for this kind of thing, but if you do watch it, I think it's fascinating. It's hilarious, actually. I think it's on Amazon Prime, but some friends of mine pirated it, I have to admit, and I watched part of it there. Part of it on the airplane. Hilarious. Pluribus. Right. So aliens come to Earth and they convert humanity into a hive mind that is very environmental, very efficient, and very nice and very kind to each other and very cooperative. And they love each other. There's no racism, sexism, because it's one big love. And that's the premise. Basically, it's like a zombie movie, except for they're not zombies. They're all very nice. And there are some people that resist. And that's the premise. That's why it's brilliant. I think it does ask some fascinating questions that have to do with social engineering and what is humanity and what can we as humans really do quite seriously, you know, realistically on this planet without an alien invasion. So yeah, thinking about countering those large-scale things, deforestation, monocultures. Again, one of the things is to be alert at certain things that are happening and can be substituted, perhaps. Even yesterday, I took an EasyJet, just like Helen, Lufthansa, and a number of other airlines. They advertise sustainable fuel. Sustainable fuel is oftentimes biofuel. Biofuel comes from plantations. Oftentimes, it can be also based on things like food waste, etc. But the European Union, of which you're no longer a part, has decided that biofuel is a renewable, which is problematic because, again, this scales up everything. And when we meet renewable energy targets, then when that is in the mix, then this is very worrying, especially because some of it comes from even old growth forests in places like my own country. I have many countries, but my original country is Russia. And because of politics, I don't want to talk about it. But at the moment, a lot of wooden pellets used for biofuel indeed do come from certain countries that do have those old growth forests, and they are the last remaining ones in Europe. Another big solution, and I'm happy to be part of it, not to get too depressed, is called environmental education. It's interesting that in the 1970s already so-called Belgrade Charter and Tbilisi Declaration were developed. And part of it is scaling things up. Indeed, in business schools 20 years ago, things like sustainable business or business ethics simply was not taught. Right now, it's pretty much the norm. I don't think you'd find a single business school without it. So that in itself is interesting. Part of it, big part of it, is just greenwashing, I must say, and talking about sustainable development goals as if they equal sustainability. Most of my work is actually critical of sustainable development goals and education for sustainable development goals, because if you think about the term development, it refers to economic and industrial development, which, if you sustain it, it can be seen as part of a problem, not a solution. I can talk about it for a very long time, but just remember next time you hear about sustainable development and sustainable development goals, there are certain questions to be asked about that as well. But education developed in the 70s had a very, very clear goal, and it's formulated here. And that in itself is interesting because indeed since the 70s it did expand in UNESCO. But yeah, another thing is this is the landscape that I actually see flying above the Netherlands towards Newcastle. Oftentimes we have fields of flowers, and it's particularly tulips, Dutch tulips, and ironically tulips from Kenya grow all over the world. And it's beautiful. You fly above fields, they are red and yellow and bright. For just 2 months after this, they're cut and they are sent on airplanes all over the world. So again, just don't do it, stop, cut flowers, this kind of stuff. And I'm not a dark person in a sense that I like flowers, I really do. But again, it's one of those things, if we think about it, when it's done on a very large scale, I guess if there were just a few million of us around the globe, it wouldn't be a problem. And right now I have to do this ridiculous life in the UK test for my settlement status, which is outrageous because I have an American passport and I have a Dutch passport, and it's just plainly humiliating. But anyway, I'm learning interesting things also about population growth in Great Britain. And yeah, it appears that when you have about 5 million people, I mean, there were no statistics on consumption at the time, but I don't think cut flowers were a problem. But now they are, because this is really large scale production flying around the world, etc. Yeah, and again, I think that some of the newer acts, and I'm getting more and more interested in this case, a Wildlife and Natural Environment Act, and how much compliance there has been throughout. I haven't been looking at Scotland as much, by the way. I've been looking very much in the northeast of England in particular. Quite a lot is happening, so I think it's good to notice that there are these changes being done, especially in relation to things like chemicals and pesticides and insecticides. And here comes the last quote, and again, it sounds like I'm promoting Cradle to Cradle book. Well, there are many issues with that too, but basically, I like it how the authors conceive of us humans not as a plague of humanity, not as a cancer, not as something growing, expanding, and being pretty nasty, but actually something that can be potentially very beautiful, and actually already is potentially is very much there. And how we relate to our environment, and the fact that we are actually, in a sense, part of our environment. It is one of those ideas that I think runs through different disciplines. We see it in philosophy, especially in environmental philosophy of people like, well, I would say Arne Naes comes to mind, deep ecology in particular. Then you have Aldo Leopold, 1940s, American naturalist, and perhaps you know many more names than I do. But the idea was also historically, and I think I've admitted that my past, I used to be an anthropologist. My PhD dissertation was written on an entirely different topic, which was migration, funny enough. But, you know, in anthropology, what we used to read, one of the most interesting books, and perhaps it's in the library here because I saw a wonderful library, it's called The Golden Bough, 19th century book by Fraser. You're nodding, so you've read it, you've heard about it, huh? Good. So yeah, it's about plant-related traditions, cultures throughout the ages, including Celtic cultures, or Celtic, it depends whether you have American or English speakers talking. But anyway, the kind of sacred woods, sacred trees, the idea of us being part of it, the idea, no, you can't just cut the forest, you can't just do this just because it's also morally wrong. There are all kinds of religious reasons, moral reasons, etc. So it's interesting that it is, again, just like manicured lawns, just like this uniform greenery, it's new. The fact that we don't treat our environment in any kind of respectful way. And I think we can unlearn it the way we've learned it too. And indeed, thinking through pragmatic, practical solutions can be something that doesn't have to mean it's too hard. It's too much of a sacrifice. It's too much of an inconvenience. There are solutions, and I very much invite all of you to, and I'm sure you're doing it already, thinking about it, but keep talking to others, especially keep talking to others that are not members of any kind of botanical society, that potentially don't understand what you see in plants. But, you know, the lucky thing is I think there are a lot of people that actually once approached, even if they just like cut flowers, everybody likes that. But, you know, engaging on a larger scale too, with our friends, family, maybe even strangers on the bus or train, that might be useful too. So I just want to leave you with the thought that there are many things that we can do to counter things, but there are also challenges that we need to acknowledge that they are quite serious and really do need to be addressed.